5 WWE legends who absolutely couldn't stand Wahoo McDaniel. Yeah, this one's going to shock you. Honestly, some of the names on this list were the last people you'd expect to have issues with him. But hey, wrestling's full of surprises, and backstage drama is a whole different story. So today, let's dig in and uncover all the real-life heat that went on behind the scenes. 1. Lex Luger. On paper, these two should have gotten along. Both were strong, athletic, and respected names in the business. But according to Wahoo's widow, Karen McDaniel, the Native American wrestling legend had a genuine dislike for the total package. And once you look at how their paths crossed, it's not too hard to see why. Back in the mid to late 1980s, Lex Luger was the new shiny face of the business. The guy with the perfect physique, incredible looks, and all the marketing hype that came with being the next big thing. Meanwhile, Wahoo was a tough veteran, a man who'd earned every bit of his reputation through blood, bruises, and real fights inside the ring. To Wahoo, wrestling wasn't about posing for cameras or looking good under the lights. It was about toughness, respect, and paying your dues the hard way. That's where the friction started. When Luger entered Jim Crockett Promotions and started getting a major push almost immediately, Wahoo reportedly didn't like how fast things were happening for him. He saw Luger as a guy who hadn't truly earned it yet. Luger had the body of a star, sure, but in Wahoo's eyes, he hadn't put in the miles on the road or gone through the same grind that old-school wrestlers did. Their personalities also clashed. Wahoo was old-school to the core, direct, no nonsense, and a bit stubborn when it came to respecting the business. Luger, on the other hand, came off as cocky and distant. Many veterans found him arrogant in those early years, and Wahoo was definitely one of them. Although the two worked together professionally in the ring, there was no real friendship outside of it. Karen McDaniel later confirmed that Wahoo's dislike for Luger wasn't about jealousy, it was about principle. He just didn't respect the way Luger carried himself or how easily success came his way. And that tension never really faded. Even years later, Wahoo never softened his opinion. For him, Lex Luger symbolized everything that was changing in wrestling. The shift from tough, gritty fighters to flashy, bodybuilder-style stars. And that was something Wahoo McDaniel just couldn't stand. 2. Johnny Valentine. If you know anything about Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel, you already know this one wasn't going to be friendly. These two were cut from the same rough, old-school cloth. Both hard-hitting, both proud, and both stubborn to the bone. But when two guys like that collide, it's not just wrestling anymore. It becomes personal. Johnny Valentine had a reputation that almost every wrestler in his era could confirm. He was stiff, meaning he hit hard, sometimes too hard. He didn't pull punches, he didn't fake slaps, and he didn't care if you were hurt afterward. As one source put it, Valentine stiffed first and asked never. He believed wrestling should look and feel real, and if that meant his opponent walked out with a few bruises or a few broken ribs, so be it. Now enter Wahoo McDaniel, who was just as tough and proud. A former football player turned wrestler, Wahoo wasn't the type to back down or take it easy either. He had his own hard-hitting style, and he expected the same from whoever stood across the ring from him. So when these two powerhouses locked up, fans weren't watching a performance, they were watching a real test of toughness. Their matches were brutal. You could hear the chops echo through the arena, and both men left the ring bleeding and bruised more often than not. But behind the scenes, it wasn't just competition, there was real tension brewing. Valentine reportedly didn't like Wahoo's attitude, thinking he was too proud and too full of himself. Meanwhile, Wahoo saw Valentine as someone who took things too far, almost trying to prove dominance rather than put on a show. The animosity showed in their matches. Every hit, every slap, every forearm felt personal. Valentine wasn't going to give an inch, and Wahoo sure wasn't going to take one. It became a battle of wills. Who was the tougher man, who could take more punishment, who could outlast the other? There was never a formal ending to their feud. It just faded as both men moved through different territories. But the memories of those matches, the brutal realism, the tension, the silent hatred, stuck with everyone who saw them. To this day, fans still talk about how you could feel the dislike between Wahoo McDaniel and Johnny Valentine in every single blow they threw. 3. Ric Flair. Wahoo McDaniel versus Ric Flair stands tall as one of the most iconic feuds of the Mid-Atlantic era. These two men went to war for over a decade, battling for pride, championships, and respect. And make no mistake, there was just as much real tension behind the curtain as there was inside the ring. In the 1970s and early 80s, both Wahoo and Flair were pillars of Jim Crockett Promotions, but they represented two very different worlds. Wahoo was the rugged, hard-hitting Native American hero who connected deeply with blue-collar fans. Flair, on the other hand, was the flashy, arrogant nature boy, all robes, limousines, and loud bragging. Their contrast made for incredible TV, but it also bred real-life friction between the two strong personalities. Their feud started when Flair was still proving himself in the Mid-Atlantic territory. Wahoo, already a big name, helped make Flair a star, but he didn't always enjoy doing it. Flair himself has admitted that Wahoo was tough on him early in his career, both physically and mentally. Wahoo didn't believe in going easy on anyone, especially someone like Flair, who he thought relied too much on charisma and not enough on toughness. Their matches were brutal classics, bloody, emotional, and incredibly physical. They traded the NWA Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title and the United States Heavyweight title multiple times, each encounter feeling more personal than the last. Flair often played the arrogant heel, bragging about being the best, while Wahoo played the proud warrior, determined to shut him up. But what made this feud so fascinating was that it blurred the line between storyline and reality. Behind the scenes, Flair and Wahoo respected each other as competitors but clashed in personality. Flair was outgoing, wild, and loved the spotlight. Wahoo was old school, private, and had little patience for Flair's flashy lifestyle. Their locker room exchanges could get heated, especially when egos got involved, and in the wrestling world, that happened a lot. By the mid-1980s, their rivalry had become legendary. Even after Flair moved on to world title fame, he never forgot those early wars with Wahoo, and though the two eventually made peace, the respect between them came at a heavy cost, earned through years of bruises, blood, and battles that helped to shape both men's legacies. 4. Johnny Valentine. This wasn't your typical good guy versus bad guy story. It was a raw, hard-hitting, pride-fueled battle between two men who refused to back down. Their feuds stretched across territories like Texas and the Mid-Atlantic region, and every time they stepped into the ring together, fans knew they were about to witness a fight, not a performance. Johnny Valentine was known for one thing above all else: stiffness. He hit like a freight train and expected the same in return. His motto was simple: if wrestling's going to look real, it's got to hurt a little. And when he faced off against Wahoo McDaniel, he found someone who shared that same mindset. Wahoo, a former football player turned wrestler, had one of the most devastating chops in the business. So when these two squared up, it became a contest of who could hit harder and who could endure more. Their matches were infamous for those brutal chop exchanges. You could hear the sound echo through the arena, skin turning bright red as neither man gave an inch. Crowds absolutely loved it because it didn't feel fake. You could see the pain, feel the impact, and sense the mutual dislike simmering underneath every strike. The rivalry really heated up in the Mid-Atlantic territory, where both men became major stars. Valentine, the cold and calculating heel, was the perfect contrast to Wahoo, the proud and fiery babyface. Their chemistry was undeniable, but so was the tension. Valentine wasn't the type to joke around backstage, and Wahoo wasn't someone who tolerated disrespect. It was said that the two carried that tension outside the ring, with real animosity spilling over from their matches. In Texas, things got even rougher. Their brawls there became the stuff of legend, long, punishing wars that often left both men bloodied. Neither wanted to lose face, and both were determined to prove they were the tougher man. Eventually, their rivalry ended, not with a handshake, but simply because time moved on and they went their separate ways. But among old-school wrestling fans, those battles between Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel are still talked about as some of the most authentically violent matches ever. 5. Greg Valentine. If you thought the rivalry between Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel was brutal, wait until you hear about what happened with Johnny's son. Greg the Hammer Valentine. It was like history repeating itself, only this time, the feud got even more personal and violent. When Greg Valentine stepped into the wrestling spotlight in the 1970s, he was already carrying the weight of his father's name. Johnny Valentine had built a tough-as-nails reputation, and Greg followed right in his footsteps. Stiff strikes, no-nonsense attitude, and a love for punishing his opponents. And just like his father, he eventually crossed paths with Wahoo McDaniel, picking up a feud that felt like it had been passed down from one generation to the next. Their rivalry kicked into full gear in Jim Crockett Promotions during the late 70s and early 80s. Wahoo was one of the biggest babyfaces in the territory, loved by fans for his intensity and pride. Greg was the perfect heel, cold, calculating, and every bit as mean as his dad. The two clashed over the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. But this wasn't just about a title. It was about pride, legacy, and who could out-tough the other. Then came the infamous moment that took their feud to legendary status. During one of their brutal matches, Greg the Hammer Valentine broke Wahoo's leg. Or at least, that's how the storyline went. But the way Greg sold it made fans believe every second of it. Wahoo was written off TV to recover, while Greg made sure everyone knew what he had done. He even started wearing a shirt that boldly read, "I broke Wahoo's leg." That move turned Greg into one of the most hated villains in wrestling. Fans despised him for it, and Wahoo's comeback was explosive. When he finally returned, he went after Valentine with pure rage, and their matches turned into absolute slugfests. Hard chops, forearms, and chaos that looked more like a fight than a wrestling match. Their feud lasted for years, switching between titles, territories, and brutal encounters. It became one of the defining rivalries of the era, the Proud Warrior versus the Heartless Hammer. And even though Greg Valentine eventually moved on to national fame in the WWF, fans never forgot the man who broke Wahoo's leg. It was a feud that defined both their careers and proved that some rivalries really do run in the family. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.